Almost immediately after the bill was signed, the NAACP, the ACLU, and other civil rights groups leveled lawsuits against Georgia officials. Joining us now, LaTosha Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter. LaTosha, welcome to the show. Your organization was part of a coalition filing the first lawsuit against Georgia's governor to halt this law. How do you see it violating the Constitution?
You know, we think this is a violation of the First and the 14th Amendment. When you think about it, puts an undue burden. We believe that it actually focuses on putting an undue burden on Black voters in the state of Georgia, that there were elements of the bill that we feel were targeted on and decreasing Black turnout. It does not, it actually creates an unequal burden of free and fair access to the ballot. In addition to that, we also see in terms of our First Amendment right, that literally this is not only just a violation of the Voting Rights Act, but our freedom of speech, our freedom of movement, for us to literally be able to cast our vote fairly and freely. When you look at some of the elements of this bill, this is the very reason why the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. This was the very reason why there was Section 5, which is more so the reason why we need H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 passed in the Senate right now, that we need additional protections, federal protections, to prevent states such as Georgia from being bad actors, to prevent and make the process more burdensome for a constituency group, or more burdensome for voters in Georgia to be able to cast their ballots and vote.
You actually led me to my next question. For those around our viewers that might not be following this story, which I doubt because we all are very closely, what about the Georgia voting law specifically impacts Black voters, LaTosha?
You know, there's a couple of things. One, when we're looking at, we can even go from in terms of the voting times. When we're looking at Black women in particular, let me just take one specific. If you look at Black women in particular, 68% of Black women are wage workers. When you're looking at in terms of the time, and they've actually shrunk the time for people to be able to vote. Working people who are wage workers, people who don't have a traditional 9-to-5 job, need access to the ballot. And whenever you're restricting people having access to the ballot, particularly outside of those times, or extending the process, you're actually limiting their access to the ballot. What we can do is we can actually look at, while they're saying there's an extension on being able to vote on the weekends, that's not entirely true. Matter of fact, when you look at an early voting on runoff elections, has actually been restricted. When you look at being able to do provisional ballots, that oftentimes in Black communities, what we've seen as a form of voter suppression is that oftentimes there are voters that show up to vote and they say, oh no, you've been moved to another polling site. But there's always been having the instrument of a provisional ballot. Now this bill sets out that provisional ballots have to be cast. If they're not cast at the correct place, if they're not cast before 5 p.m., which many people don't get off work until after 5. Even traditional work times usually don't end until 5 o'clock. That those ballots will not in fact count. When you also look at I think another issue around, particularly when we're talking about Fulton County and DeKalb County, which have a large, sizable Black population in this last election cycle. What we know is that President Trump was not satisfied at the results that came out of those elections, or the election officials in those particular counties, those Black counties, and essentially wanted to overturn the election. And so the most egregious part of this bill is literally giving the GOP power to go into these counties and literally be able to take over, and if they don't like the results, from the Board of Elections in those local counties. And we saw that was targeted directly at those counties, that what you're saying, not just Black voters, but you're saying Black election officials who are also managing the oversight of those elections.
LaTosha, I have less than 2 minutes with you, so I'm going to go rapid fire because you are doing such a good job laying this out, and I have so many questions. So first, what will Black Voters Matter be doing in response to this law?
So there's a couple of things. So one, we got 3 strategies. The first strategy is to organize in the streets. We've been talking to communities. We've been educating them about this. And there's been a whole lot of pressure. People are very frustrated and angry, and they're putting pressure on the elected officials. Also in the courtrooms, as you talked about, we've actually filed a lawsuit on this rate, ask for a federal injunction for them to actually intervene in this. And the third thing is we're actually launched a corporate accountability campaign, that our corporate partners that live in our communities, that we work in those communities, we're consumers, that we're telling them that you cannot continue to invest in those elected officials who continue to lead voter suppression efforts.
Corporate accountability. That is very, very interesting. I have about 15 seconds, Brian. Is that correct? I'm talking to my producer. 15 seconds, very quickly. What about other states' voting laws here, LaTosha? What is BVM doing to stop these from being enacted in other parts of the country?
You know, it's going on. Unfortunately, this is going on in 47 states all around the country. Where we see the most, what's coming up most recently is in Texas. So right now we're launching 5 campaigns in 5 other states: North Carolina, Texas, and Florida, being several of those states that are actually looking at fast-moving legislation to prevent the vote.
Excellent job getting that in. Thank you so much, LaTosha. We hope you come back. This is a story we're all following very closely. LaTosha Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter. Let's bring back